Hello there. Hello, everybody. Hoping it's going all right down there, wherever you are. Here, as usual, or as should be usual from here on out, it's me and Robert King. Last week, we had a rather terrible experience because my internet was not sorted out at all. But but fortunately, it's working better this time around. So what we're going to do now is just some more fun news items for the start. I think, look, the first one, obviously, which is in the thumbnail, is Peter Marais in the Western Cape Parliament announcing that all of the fellows from the ANC who are represented down there were foreigners who should mind their own business, which I thought was quite. I mean, look, he said similar things before, but not on the floor of the parliamentary, not on the floor of the provincial parliament. So
They're not directed at ANC.
yeah, and I mean, like my favorite one is the ANC chief whip who responded to it. His name is Pat Lekker.
Her name. Oh, do we
Her
have
name?
the? Do you, yeah. Do
Oh,
you have
short
the
for
clip with
Patricia.
you?
Okay.
Do you
Beg your
have the
pardon?
clip with you of Peter Marais' comments? I can see if I
I'm
can get
afraid
it up.
I couldn't. I'm afraid I couldn't find a video of it.
I can see if I can get it up. It's on News 24.
Oh, great!
Oh, wait,
No, that would be
I'll try and
fantastic.
look for it. Quickly
Yeah,
on YouTube.
but it was no. I mean, but look, he's quite a remarkably how should I put brazen fella. He doesn't. I think at his age, he doesn't have to worry too much about what anyone thinks of what he says. So he ends up saying things that no one else would say, and it certainly makes life a little bit more exciting down here. But I mean, it was interesting because I had an interesting exchange a while ago with a fellow on Twitter who insisted that, based on one extract of Van Riebeck's diary, that Xhosa people had been all the way up to the peninsula. They'd lived all the way up to the peninsula in right at the time that the first settlers arrived, and I thought, well, that sounds a bit funky, you know. I mean, look, he got it from actually a book called The House of Paulo by a Portuguese historian on the origins of the Xhosa people, and the only citation he had for this claim that they occupied the whole Cape was this one citation from Van Riebeck's diary. So I thought that sounds a bit fishy. It doesn't jive with everything I said. So I just looked up the original sources, and it turns out that no, this was an account that he'd gotten from an informant who'd never ventured beyond the peninsula and knew that somewhere over there are some black people who are fairly rich, and then misattributed the ruler of this kingdom to Monomatopa, who at the time was actually the ruler of what's now Zimbabwe, or at least a region within it. So there's a lot of crossed wires. Funnily enough, that informant, Eva Kratoa, turns out to be one of my ancestors way back when. So yeah, I wouldn't want to be too rude, but
It's like not more than 90% of Afrikaners have Khoi or San DNA in them.
yeah, something like that. I mean, it's a vanishingly tiny proportion because once the French ladies showed up, they preferred to go with the French ladies and the Khoi.
But I was once at a EFF Plus event in Riebeck West, and the key speaker was Peter Marais, and he was explaining history from his perspective. And he said when Jan van Riebeck first arrived, there were no black people in the Cape. They were all in Zimbabwe still. But when the settlers arrived, the Khoi and San ladies would wave at the men from the boats, and from that, the coloured man was born. That was his description of how history went. So
that's very picturesque, but it's not quite what happened. I just thought I'd share this little. It's a very short little thingamajig thread, but I thought it was worth it. So the thing is, at the time they called them the Kabona, and that was because at the time the old Nguni dialect greeted people with the phrase Sakubona, much like how the Zulu greetings are Sawubona. Anyhow, so Van Riebeck's account was third hand. But now here's an interesting thing. So I found like an account from a diary written 20 years later. No, not 20 years later, but a few years later. 33 years later. And they were having a look at they were having a look at, you know, how far they had to travel to find these people, because they wanted to find the Carbona. And they travel 500 miles on horseback along the coast. So I went to Google Maps and I plotted this out, 500 miles on horseback along the coast. And then they say they reached a point where they were a 5 days ride from where these people lived. So I plotted that out. I said a healthy horse can ride at least 25 miles a day, which puts us just the other side of the Sundays River. And I thought, oh, that's geographically interesting because, here we go. Here is an ethno-linguistic map of the Eastern Cape from 2011 based on the census of that day. And what would you know? All of the Xhosa marked out in red, all of the Xhosa majority areas marked out in red are east of the Sundays River. And those little turquoise patches are majority Afrikaans-speaking areas. And I thought, that's a fairly good illustration of, what people are, how little people seem to know about our history, and how some people, even if they're a bit rough around the edges, actually have a fairly good grasp of it. Peter Marais being case in point.
Well, do we want to maybe take a look at these clips? I've got it up here. If you can maybe just share my screen there.
Sure.
Okay.
Call for the empowerment of colored and Khoi emerging farmers in this province, entrepreneurs and indigenous households who are on housing waiting lists, as these minorities are neglected and receive very little benefits in terms of the labor equity laws and housing, having to compete against numerically superior African blacks whose influx to the Western Cape has changed the demographics of this province. Racial tensions are increasingly building up. We call on the Western Cape government to take remedial action to prevent racial tensions escalating and flaring up because of a fight for scarce resources by the influx.
Order.
And if anybody here calls me a racist,
Order,
the
members.
racists are the ANC
Order.
at national level.
Thank you, Honorable Marais. Order, members. Order. I see Al-Jamaa.
Oh, thank you very much,
Order, members.
Honorable Speaker. Bismillah.
Members.
Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim. Al-Jamaa
Members.
is concerned about the increasing incidence of criminal
Honorable
activities
members.
at public.
Honorable members. Honorable Laker. Honorable Laker. Honorable Laker. Members. I see the Chief Whip. Chief Whip. Order, members, there's a member on the floor. Honorable member, Honorable Chief Whip. Honorable Marais, there's a member on the floor. There's a member on the floor. Members. Honorable Nkondlo. Honorable Chief Whip.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise.
The voice.
Honorable members, there's a member on the floor. Honorable Chief
Thank
Whip.
you, Speaker. I rise at this moment feeling worn out and at pains with what is happening in the House, particularly when we're being called foreigners in our own country. I really do not take it kind in whatever the altercation was to refer to black people in particular as foreigners is an insult of the highest order. And I want you to rule on that matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Chief Whip. I will come back to the House with the ruling.
Well, I
So,
think the obvious question most people sort of the obvious response to that, the sort of easy conservative response would be to say, well, imagine if the situation was reversed, and that formula looks like saying, well, you know, imagine calling white people foreigners when we were under British rule, you know. I was
well, I
like,
mean,
but
I just saw today the EFF member of Parliament, what's his name, from the Western Cape, got a really weird beard. Anyway, he was making comments that we're going to basically get all the settlers out of the Western Cape before we remove the DA from power. And then I've, through the Cape U-Front account, I've questioned Cameron Dugmore, considering he's now taking Peter Marais to the South African Human Rights Commission. Is he going to take this EFF MP to the South African Human Rights Commission as well? Because clearly this was far worse than whatever Peter Marais said. And I should criticize Peter Marais a bit because he isn't entirely accurate with his comments. I mean, Phil Craig provided the data on Twitter. I mean, back in the 1890s even, you actually had a almost perfect split in the Western Cape between the three main racial groups. About a third of the population was coloured, a third was white, and a third was black. But
I would throw up an asterisk after that, because remember, the Cape Colony at the time included the Eastern Cape, and so the vast majority
data was for the district that covered most of the Western Cape bits today. So the Cape Colony back then was split into 3 districts, and the first district covered most of what the Western Cape is today. But look, remember, it was almost a different type of cause group we had here at the time. It was the Mbengu people. And what we've seen, especially in the last, or certainly 30 years, is a different type of migration, and it's in many cases an illegal type of migration, not just from the Eastern Cape, but also from other parts of the country and the continent as well. But it's quite important.
I mean, in particular, it's the character of that migration as well is very particular, because it really accelerated after about 2010-ish. I mean, I remember, so I've got relatives down in Hermanus, and I mean, anyone who knows about Hermanus's problems will be aware it's quite dire. But they, in 2011, Jacob Zuma started paying people to move to the Western Cape. So they were promised a packet of, I think it's like 1,000 something rand. I can't remember exactly what the figure was, but they showed up in such numbers that within 1 month, in the middle of 2011, that this local Standard Bank branch actually ran out of cash. And I think about that a lot, because I mean, where these people were going is they were being directed. It's sort of like now it's a full-scale industry, shack farming, where you have members of the ruling party or the EFF, or sometimes just random members of organized crime. They show up to a field, and then they've got purchasers somewhere. They stake out little claims, and they build shacks on it, and they occupy it, and they charge people like 1,000 or 2,000 rands rent for the shack, and they run a sort of parallel state system through this mechanism, and it's it's really nasty. And the thing is that if you want to remove these people, there's a whole bunch of really, really difficult legal hurdles. You have to basically catch them in the first 48 hours, or you're in trouble. And you have to you cannot move them further than, I can't remember what it was, like 2.5 kilometers away. And it's like, oh, you want to go live somewhere nice? Well, just go there and steal some land, and the government, the local council will have to put you up somewhere.
Let's remember another hurdle is Jordan Hill-Lewis wants to continue this pace of migration as well.
I don't understand that man's game. I mean, I know intellectually that the position is, if they come here and they experience how lovely we treat them, they're going to vote DA. But the evidence is standing in front of him. I mean, look, those majority black areas in the city bowl, they vote ANC still. Yeah,
I mean, if you look at the results, it's something like 70%. I mean, the turnout is a lot lower. That is true, but it's a risk you've got there, because if, for example, some populist black nationalist politician tries to incite racial tensions in those areas where there's all the potential to do it. We can just maybe see next week when the EFF tries to do their shutdown what might happen. But if you increase turnout there, you can have a massive problem there for the anti-charterist majority in the Western Cape. I mean, if you look at the results in Khayelitsha, it's like 70% for the ANC and then about 15% for the EFF. So clearly there's no shift going on there to the DA. It's wishful thinking. And look, I mean, as we've said, as the CYF, we have no problem with people coming to the Western Cape from other parts of the country and going through the proper process, like most people do. You know, buying property here, renting property here, going through the rightful process. And it's not, you know, there's nothing to do with race. And I think we're actually going to see some really big problems in the northern suburbs, or in the western suburbs of Cape Town, in the Parklands, Dunoon area, because you've just seen over the last 3 years in Dunoon a massive expansion of that informal settlement there on a floodplain. It's just been unprecedented. Every time I go through that, it expands. But that's next to a new suburb of Cape Town that is about 40% black and 40% white. But this is, you know, the black middle class moving, and this is, you know, people going through the process to move there. And I think you're going to see tensions, regardless of race, between those two communities, because people are not going to be happy with the increase in rates they're going to have to see, the increase in crime they're going to see, and the general destabilization of that area.
No, it's quite bad. I think that I mean, like you say, it's just not being taken seriously enough. And the thing is, the ANC has a very, very quick fix to sort this out. If they really want to win the next election, all they have to do is finish that electoral reform bill that they've been forced to do, and ram through one with a provision that says that in national and provincial elections, you do not have to register to vote. You merely have to show up with your ID booklet. If they do that, they will win. Because, I mean, research, I came across a bit of research where they polled people on, you know, who they vote for by age group. And the younger people are, the more likely they are, across all racial groups, interestingly enough, the younger people are, the more likely they are to vote for charterist parties, ANC, EFF. So
I think the problem we've got with younger people is that the sample size you're dealing with there is incredibly small. So it might not be giving.
I wouldn't say that because, I mean, the figures they had were actually smaller for the older groups. So,
okay, but does that data give you just registered voters, or is it all young people in general?
No, it wasn't registered voters. That's what I'm saying.
Okay,
is that it's what you're getting is a situation where, I mean, we've seen it within our age cohort. Is that, look, you and I surround ourselves with a lot of people who are, you know, right thinking, sensible, whatever. But a lot of people who go through the school system are aware that any kind of position that could be construed as conservative in any respect will be alienated from their social environment.
I don't think that's the case in some of the northern suburb schools I've been hearing from. I've had some quite optimistic stories coming from those.
Well, I mean, look, there's always good news if you're willing to, if you want to find it. But I mean, I think I think my experience of watching, you know, very ordinary, sensible people within my generation who didn't have particularly left-wing views immediately sort of say, well, I mean, I'm not saying these people are going to go vote for the ANC or anything. Just sort of the general pressure, the general social pressure, is to move leftward, and it does create an atmosphere where people are less likely to be sensible about these things. Well,
I think it also depends on your type of school you go to as well. I think you're probably going to end up more conservative going for maybe an Afrikaans-speaking school than an English-speaking school. I think that, you know, there are those cultural trends there as well that have an impact. I mean, I have to say from my personal experience, yeah, I have a fairly conservative friend group, but even speaking to people who aren't in that friend group, I generally find that, you know, there is certain conservative tendencies there, which is quite optimistic, but, you know, it does, I think, come more from the Afrikaans side than the English side.
No, this is true. I mean, I remember when I was on a contract with AfriForum, there was a big speech that I had to give at some event of theirs, and my Afrikaans wasn't as fluent as it is now. I was still making all kinds of errors where I slipped into Dutch, so I had to do this in English, but which sort of kind of undermined my point. But what I was trying to say at the time was that all of these ideas and special terminology that have been created for, you know, the ideology, the dominant ideology, you know, woke progressive stuff, doesn't really translate well into Afrikaans. And those papers are not translated into Afrikaans. And so generally speaking, it's really hard for people to be woke in Afrikaans. And it provides a kind of insulating effect, which is quite positive. It keeps them a little bit behind the curve, which is why you notice all of... Go on.
I find wokeness almost to be quite an English-speaking issue, really. I mean, it's like, especially if you look at the polling of voting trends, young people in the Anglosphere, as they get older, concerningly, are actually becoming even more left-wing. That's a trend they've identified in many Anglosphere countries. I think America might be slightly different from that exception, but certainly in the Kansas countries. But if you look at Europe, it's the exact opposite trend. As people get older in Europe, they're becoming more right-wing. And I think that's because the ideas of woke ideology are far more inherent in the English-speaking cultures than they are in non-English-speaking cultures.
And there's also that whole signaling thing. It's like part of identity. Sort of an Afrikaner can say, well, I'm not that kind of thing. And an English person can say, well, I'm not that kind of thing. And you get the same with Europe. I mean, the Europeans will look at the English and the Americans and say, well, all of this poisonous stuff is destroying our society, and we're not that. Whereas the society it comes from is going to say, well, at least we're not like you. And this reinforces the difference. But I mean, it's
and I feel like, especially Afrikaners have built a largely, increasingly, an uncancelable culture as well. I mean, they're building these institutions, these educational institutions, these cultural institutions. I mean, Steve Hofmeyer's been cancelled, but I mean, his music is still readily available. I mean, he still does lots of concerts that have pretty good attendance. So, you know, despite these attacks from the mainstream institutions, these parallel institutions have really shown themselves to be strong assets to the Afrikaans culture.
Yeah, definitely. I think I look at some of the guys who are involved with the Academia project, who I've spoken to, and it's the way they're thinking is very much. I mean, there's some of it's like very practical. It's like, well, you know, how do we get students to sign up for it? Well, we have to provide things like, you know, accounting or whatever, business science. But a lot of the intellectuals involved with this are sort of thinking on the order of, you know, civilizational stuff, you know. How do we preserve knowledge and tradition for coming generations? How do we establish? I mean, I had an interesting conversation with Koos Malan about this, and he was saying that I was mentioning a novel called Canticle for Leibowitz, which is about 500 years after a nuclear holocaust wipes out most modern technology. I'm skipping over some details here, but basically the Catholic monastic order preserves most of human knowledge and is reintroduced by the monks again. And I mean, it's hard to imagine now, considering the things that the Catholic Church are going through. But the idea that it's also in Isaac Asimov, you know, his novel's Foundation, where they're going on a distant, dusty planet on the edge of, you know, the empire. They set up a research institution to preserve all the empire's civilizational knowledge to wait for its collapse. And it's kind of, I suspect this is what's behind Elon Musk's big push for Mars. But, you know, the Karoo might as well be Mars, and Orania might as well be Foundation.
Maybe Musk's secret idea is to create a false start on Mars.
Oh, that would be funny. But no, he's a liberal cat. That one. He's just an old boomer liberal.
Yeah, he's posted that meme where, you know, the left has been running away from him, and then he's found himself on the right. That whole story.
Yeah, I mean, like, the thing is, for us, we're still trying to hold on to what's left to quite a great degree. I mean, even the Cape Independence movement, which sounds so radical to a lot of people, is actually really a rather conservative middle ground position in the grand scheme of things, because we're trying to preserve modern Western liberal democracy, in the hopes that that will sort of give us the sort of secure, comfortable life for long enough. But it still gets a lot of pushback, extraordinary pushback. Even though, I mean, like if you really look at it, there's not much controversial in it. It's a fairly ordinary
if you saw today, and I'm no fan of Helen Ziller, but she's being attacked, even though she's quite a liberal person and she's opposed to Cape independence, and she's being attacked as too right wing in South Africa, and she's a liberal. So I mean, the idea of Cape independence, I mean, for the establishment, especially for the black nationalist parties, I mean, it's completely extreme. But naturally, for the Western Cape, we're completely different in our political outlook, and this is, the centrist position in many ways.
Yeah, we're the sensible centrists. But speaking of which, another one of our big news items has been the various forces in the country railing against the coming People's Bill, which is a really sort of it's a rather mild-mannered piece of legislation, really.
And we've got to be careful about what we talk about, because at the moment, I mean, the bill hasn't even been made public. I mean, only a handful of people, I think, have seen it, including myself. But I think the best way to go maybe is just to dispel some of the myths that were put in that IOL article criticising it, and maybe just setting the record straight on that front. And the CIAG has already done that on the website. But,
we can just read. I can just screen. I can just share the screen because I got it open. It was a very short statement from. It's a very short statement from Phil Craig, our dear leader at the moment, and he says, the Cape Argos's article on the Western Cape People's Bill was unfortunate and badly missed the mark. It claims legal experts have dismissed the bill as nonsense. Yet none of the experts the Argus quoted have even seen the bill, since it has not yet been released for comment. The bill was written by a highly qualified legal team, and those independent experts who have seen the current draft have indicated that its impact will be profound. In addition, the commentary offered is factually incorrect and sensationalist. The South African Constitution establishes the Western Cape as a province, grants it legal authority, and establishes a provincial legislature whose explicit role is to represent the people of the Western Cape. The current Western Cape government was elected on the promise of trying to redefine the balance of power between the province and the national government, and this is exactly what the bill proposes to do. To talk of Bantustans is dishonest and ridiculous. In the language of international law, the people of the Western Cape are not governed according to their so-called freely chosen policy. South Africa is falling apart at the seams, and Western Cape, where the majority have never once voted for the architect of South Africa's destruction, wants to take more control over its own destiny. Post-1994, South Africa has repeatedly sworn to uphold the right to self-determination as contained in international law, and the people of the Western Cape are perfectly entitled to claim it should they wish to do so. The UN say it can be exercised in the form of devolution, federalism, or independence. It was especially disappointing to read Professor Nico Statler attempting to suggest that ideology has never been an indicator of a people. Not only is this factually incorrect, because in its description of a people, UNESCO specifically lists ideological affinity as a potential characteristic. But does Professor Statler really want to steer the debate around self-determination into ethnic lines because the argument would be legally easier to make? Well, morally as well as legally, the people of the Western Cape are entitled to take control of their own destiny, and South Africa should rejoice that self-determination is being pursued peacefully and democratically. And when it is tabled, the Western Cape People's Bill will enhance non-racial democracy, not threaten it. Rather nice and tidy and very public-friendly, and nothing controversial there. I mean, remarkably tame.
Just share my screen I've got here. I've got the IOL article, and I just want to, one of their main attack lines...
Just zoom in a little bit so people can read along.
Okay, yeah. So the main attack line that they've got here is that this group cannot produce a bill for the Western Cape Provincial Parliament. Only an MEC or member of the legislature may do so. This is merely a document, not a bill by any stretch of the imagination. Now, I should make this clear that this is going to be presented in the Parliament at some point, and it's not a secessionist piece of work. It's going to obviously be advantageous to secession, as it would be for federalism or devolution. But people should remember we've got something called the Western Cape Devolution Working Group that exists. And in that group, there are 3 political parties represented in the Western Cape legislature, the DA, the ACDP, and the Freedom Front. And so far, some of those bill parties have agreed to support the legislation, and others are still discussing it. I'm not going to say which ones. People can maybe make their own inferences from that. But this is going to be something that's going to be presented in the Parliament. This is a bill. And yes, it's going to have some pretty profound impacts on not just Western Cape politics, but on South African politics. And I think it's really going to make devolution and federalism and self-determination an issue that no one will really be able to control. It will be a natural, organic process.
I think the interesting point that people are missing, that people may not know here, is that in the South African Constitution, which I may have lying around here somewhere, so I use it fairly frequently, and there's a bit. If I find it quickly, I'll share it with you people. But if I don't find it quickly, then I will just chuck the book back into a corner. But generally speaking, there's actually a provision in the Constitution that prioritizes international law. So over South African law. In a very, very strict sense. So I think what's easily forgotten is the impact that this will have, because most people don't actually know what we're signatory to. We are signatory to a whole bunch of international treaties that force us to recognize self-determination. And once we have a province that has declared itself to be a separate people, then the consequences of this is that the national government will be held to the international statutes that they've signed to recognize the autonomy that is demanded by the province. And if they are denied this, this produces a very, very profound constitutional problem, because the Constitutional Court can then force. Didn't find it, bloody useless book. Anyway, the Constitutional Court can then force the Parliament to table a bit of legislation. And the thing is, if the Parliament doesn't want to deal with it, then there's nothing the Constitutional Court can really do. So it creates a standing constitutional crisis, like the one we have at the moment for the what's it called, the election reforms that they were forced to do. And that particular crisis opens the window to unilateral action. The thing is, we don't really know where the balance of power is going to be after 2024. We know that it will be changed. The ANC will be somewhat weaker, but weakness leads to people often acting out. And so you could probably see a lot of more radical action from the ANC after they lose the majority. And I think the likelihood is that it will stimulate large amounts of resistance within the Democratic Alliance if it's outside of the government at the time. So,
and we know that independent sentiment is there, especially at the councillor level. I mean, we've interacted with councillors, and there's that pro-independent sentiment. And I think, especially if they're forced to choose between an ANC-DA coalition and Cape Independence, once you bring it to those two choices, I think you're also going to see a far bigger divide emerge in that party.
That's true. But they have a lot of internal control. The caucus has very strong control in that party. It's remarkable. But they do use a lot of sort of shady tricks to get this done. I mean, the general practice seems to be that a lot of MEPs don't read the legislation that they put forward. They have some party apparatchik, usually someone further to the left of them, writing the legislation, as was the case with the Western Cape education policy, which led to the mandatory critical race theory classes for people in Fisher High School and elsewhere, that was imposed by the administration. I mean, from what I heard, I spoke to someone inside the party who was kind enough to be open with me about this and said, Knowing Debbie Schaefer personally, he can't imagine her passing anything like that herself. But it's also likely that she didn't read what was put out there. The other big thing that happens is that you have councillors being forced to vote on party mandates with no time to read the contents. And that creates all kinds of issues because, you will be disciplined if you do not vote in the correct way, and you're not allowed to know what you're voting on. And I mean, this kind of behavior means that the party generally doesn't respect the people lower down the food chain, and that's going to create resentment. And particularly now that they're starting to entertain a coalition with the ANC, who's like their arch enemy. It's a recipe for chaos. It's a recipe for chaos.
Yeah, and I mean that is really the peak moment. Then, if they do start discussing that after the next elections, the idea of a coalition, because I mean I've spoken to people who say that almost every DA councillor they've spoken to is at least sympathetic to Cape independence. So and those are the if you go and almost break the DA's core values by going into coalition with a national, socialist party, a African nationalist party. I think you not only do you lose those councillors potentially, or at least some of them, but you also lose a lot of the activists, a lot of the members, a lot of, crucially, the voters. And it would lead to the almost immediate implosion of the DA, and you'll notice it very quickly in by-elections after a coalition taking place. But of course, at that point, it might be too late. So hopefully we can avoid an ANC-DA coalition taking place. And we both want to see an ANC-IFP coalition. I think we know that that's probably in the short term going to be the best case scenario for not just the Western Cape, but for every cultural group in South Africa that is seeking self-determination. Having a party that in the past has pushed for self-determination and is quite ethnically nationalist in its orientation, it's going to be an advantage to us.
But it's going to be an interesting arrangement because at the same time, the IFP are offering a coalition, are sort of engaging in talks of coalition with the DA for KwaZulu-Natal, which, I mean, for me, there are real issues with that in that if the IFP wants to go in a coalition with the ANC or vice versa, there's no way that partnership at the national level can tolerate a partnership with the DA at the provincial level. And the logic of sort of Ubuntu unity, or let's use the strict Simunia politics. Yeah, it makes that quite an unstable arrangement.
Well, remember, I think Buthelezi was a member of the cabinet until 2004. I think it was 2004 he was still Minister of Home Affairs. And I think in 1999, the IFP was still in government in KZN, but they were in coalition. And they weren't coalition with the ANC. They were in coalition with the DP. At the time, the DP had, I think, 2 seats in the KZN legislature. And they were in a coalition between them. So there has been, past precedents for there being one coalition arrangement at the provincial level and one at the national level. And back then, the ANC was probably in a far stronger position to, make these demands on the IFP for a coalition at the provincial level. Remember, they had a 2/3 majority almost. So they could have easily, gotten rid of Buthelezi, but they kept him anyway. So I think if they do, I think the IFP will be in a far stronger position to maybe set the terms of these coalition arrangements, both at the provincial and national levels. But I think if we do get a coalition,
the only thing I'd be concerned about is, again, because of that weakness, they'd be far more desperate for control. But this is really sort of like idle speculation at this point. So.
Well, from what I heard, the on a lot of the motions, I mean, remember, who's going to give you the most control from the EFF, DA, or IFP? Look, it depends. If the ANC gets 49% of the vote, they might go into coalition with the Patriotic Alliance. But the 3 big coalition partners they're looking at are those 3 parties. The DA is going to cause them a lot of problems. The EFF is going to also cause them a lot of problems. There's going to cause internal, the internal factions in the ANC are certainly not looking at the EFF as an ideal coalition partner. From
Mm.
what I've heard, the IFP on a lot of motions in Parliament and things like that, and when it comes to procedure, they actually vote alongside the ANC on many cases. So it might actually be the closest thing the ANC has to the status quo by going into coalition with the IFP. And as I've said, they've got that past precedence of working with them, so they know how to engage with that sort of coalition partner. But look, I mean, look, the ANC and IFP have also been in coalition with each other, I think, as late as 2021. So it's been a recent occurrence as well that these two parties have worked together. But yeah, we just have to see what happens. It's very speculative.
Look, there's that really wacky polling result that the DA shared around, which said that the ANC are going to fall below 40% next year, which I'm not so sure I buy that.
In his worldview thing said they need to push the ANC down below 30%. That was his comment.
I mean, there's no way that the ANC would accept something like that. There's no way they'd accept something like that. I mean, like, whatever they'd have to do, they're not accepting that. And they're going to stay in government. They need to be, for them to leave, they have to be gradually introduced to the idea of losing power. Because if you rip the carpet out from underneath them, it's back to resistance tactics. And
I mean, look, sponsoring the gangs, demographic changes, those kind of things. I mean, but look, obviously we don't know what's going to happen at the national level because, I mean, they can't really bring in, or if they don't have control over the borders, they can't bring in many illegal foreigners. But yeah, I mean, it's concerning. It's the danger you don't know. But
so I would rather not shake that cage too much. I'd rather just prepare the lifeboats and get off the ship. So
yeah, and self-determination is the only lifeboat we've got.
Exactly. No, exactly. I mean, like, again, there are 3 self-determinationers: the Cape, Zulu, and Afrikaner enclave separatism. There's only really 3 options. The last of those 3 is going to happen regardless of what you do. Like, there's no stopping that motion. It's very slow, but they've got foundation stones there. It's very good to build on. I mean, I mean, I could rattle on about what they're busy with for a while, but that's not the topic of our discussion tonight. That's perhaps a chat for another time. But while we're talking about sort of these radical movements, one of the more sort of comical things that's happened recently is Jacob Zuma making a land claim to the whole of South Africa on behalf of only black people, which I mean, I don't know what the shape of implementation he's expecting from this, and I don't know what political sort of maneuver he's offering behind this kind of gesture. But I mean, like, look, throughout his career, he's made a lot of these kind of grand radical gestures that have been backed up by absolutely nothing but hot air. And I mean, in terms of like public statements, he was by far the most radical president we've had. And yet, Cyril Ramaphosa has done far more to advance radical economic transformation than his predecessor has. And so I think, look, Jacob Zuma is a blusterer. His main aim is to make sure that his friends and family are looked after. He's the Tony Soprano of South Africa. That's his vibe. Whereas Cyril Ramaphosa is a true believer. That's what I think. I think, look, whatever Jacob Zuma is doing, it's an opportunity for a lot of trolling from people who want to take advantage of these things. So, you want to lay claim to this? Well, now the coloured people are laying claim to the whole of the Cape, or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think once we get this Western Cape People's Bill passed, I think the first thing that Peter Marais has to do is make a land claim to everything west of the Sundays River, up into the Northern Cape, on behalf of the Cape people. I think that's what needs to be done very quickly.
I wonder if we could give him a ring and offer the suggestion. That would be a lot of fun.
I think he'd be totally up for it.
Oh yeah, no, grand. Because I mean, it's always difficult to sort of. I was having this sort of internal discussion a while back because you have the Western Cape. Okay, it's whenever you're trying to break away a piece of land and sort of appeal to independence or whatever, there's always this idea of, well, okay, well, where are the borders? And okay, Western Cape, easy. Northern Cape, easy. What do you do with that, like, western part of the Eastern Cape? Well, it doesn't have a name, you know? So how do you talk about it? Well, I mean, it's difficult. But
The Western Eastern Cape is not really a great name.
it's terrible. I saw someone with like one of those little homemade like maps call it the Tsitsikamma region. So maybe,
Yeah, I mean,
maybe
that probably makes most sense. I mean, when you look at the Eastern Cape as well, I mean, in the Northern Cape, there's a lot of municipalities that are culturally the same as the Western Cape. I mean, Afrikaans-speaking majority, more than 90% of the population speak Afrikaans, and more than 80% of the population are coloured. In the Eastern Cape, there's only about 3 municipalities where that is the same, mostly on the coast, and then Graafrenet up there into the desert.
Vanna Roots down there in the comments has made an interesting comment. He said, it does have a name, it's called Albany. Ooh, I must correct you, but it is a very interesting point. So where that comes from, very famously, well, not very famously, it used to be famous, but now it's a footnote for nerds like us, is so the big shot novelist and historian Arthur Keppel-Jones, he wrote this very famous book called When Smuts Goes, which is sort of like a speculative history of what happens after, you know, grand unifying white leadership collapses after Smuts. He says, okay, we're going to have an Afrikaner fascist government, then we're going to collapse under black rebellion, and then everything's going to fall to shit, and the UN will have to step in and do peacekeeping, right? So that's the long code. But he published another book where I think it was in 1947 or something like that, and he sort of planned out, okay, well, look, we know the other Afrikaners are going to come to power soon. If they want to take this whole thing seriously, they need to break up the country. And here are different ways they can break up this country. Beautifully made map. And I cannot find a copy of this book. I've seen screenshots of it from Marais Twitter. I desperately would love to get my hands on a copy of this. But, you know, these things are out of print, and like books keep getting destroyed in South African libraries for some reason. So, but he called the little region sort of in the middle of the Eastern Cape towards the coast, he called it Albany, and that's where all the English farmers sat. You know, I don't know if you've been to that area. It's remarkable. I mean,
I've got a map here.
Yeah, have you got the?
I'm not sure if it's the original map, but it's a map from Wikipedia outlining Albany. Let me just get it there, so you can get an idea of where it is. So it's to the east of Port Elizabeth. I'm not sure if you can see it.
Right. Yes. So, I mean, but it's if you've been out there to, I went to Bathurst a while back because an ex-girlfriend of mine, her family was out there, and it really is like visiting an English village. It's like you have these big stone Anglican churches, and everyone's like, you know, polite, and you know, there's a village green, and everyone lives within walking distance, and it's the vibe is absolutely like, you know, it really is. It's like an English village where all the foliage is wrong, and and everyone's dressed in sort of hippie clothes. It's very weird, but they're very lovely down there. It's really nice, and I think the thing is, because they tend to be more liberal, they have very good relations with, you know, surrounding populations very much. Whereas, I mean, Afrikaners, as much as I love their company, I think even they'd have to admit they do tend to have rather rough relations with their neighbors sometimes. Yeah, no, it was not that it's going to do not that it's going to do anyone too much good to be friendly. I mean, I recently read a rather sort of nasty little book, well written, beautifully written, and wonderfully honest as well. It's called My Traitor's Heart by what's his name, Rian Malan, and he used to be a communist, and he was sent into exile, and he comes back in 1990, and he writes this memoir, and he goes all over the country, and he looks at all these different things, and he writes these fine-grained detail. Now, there's a famous, well, in economic circles, he's famous. There's a guy called G.G. Alcock. Now, he's a white guy who's raised Zulu. and he is an expert he's an expert in the informal economy and measuring its performance. And here's something that you probably find on the back of a Chappies wrapper, but he is the guy who wrote all the did you knows in the Chappies wrappers back in the day. But anyway, so this book is actually about his father, his parents, who moved down to the middle of Singa, and they set up a special farm and like tried to introduce sort of irrigation and everything into, with really like threadbare, like no funds, just raw ingenuity and hard work and goodwill. And they built a mission outpost and everything, and they worked very hard to uplift the community and get irrigation running, get local farms and gardens going, and it ended badly for them. They faced uphill battle against local ethnic tensions between different tribal groups within the Zulu nation, and in the end, trying to broker peace between them, old Neil Alcock got shot to pieces on the roadside. And I mean, look, he was celebrated by the people in the community. A lot of people really truly loved him, but there's a certain futility. There's a certain futility that arises out of hearing this story, particularly in seeing how many people they helped personally turned around on them and just took them for all they had. And it's very sad to read these kind of stories. And this is from 1990. This is not even the modern day. It's hard. There's some of these hard facts of life where you do need enough strength in numbers in a country to be able to determine how and where you're going to fit in. You can't, as an outsider, come and change everything about a society and make it into something that it isn't. A little bit of a black pill for some people, I guess.
I think in many ways Rhodesia was like that.
I mean, because they were such a tiny minority. The idea that sort of the Rhodesians could really run and transform Shona society, they'd need hundreds of years. And by that point, it would probably end up looking something like the Indian caste system, where the old Indo-European invaders into India ended up as the Brahmin caste, and then you've got all of these different, they'd have to hold on to power for so long that they'd have to have some sort of weird, sort of ritualized way of instituting their control. It wasn't going to last forever, and I think the same is true of South Africa to some extent. I mean, you could probably, if it wasn't for the international community, you could probably milk maybe another 20, 30 years out of it, but even that's stretching it. These things are not sustainable.
Not to mention the moral constraints of it all.
Yeah, I mean, but look, I mean, I'm a guy who's always into realpolitik. I'm not. There's.
I know, but the morals play a role in realpolitik anyway, as well.
Yeah. No, that's true. I mean, it wasn't. Look, the white rule was never accepted. I mean, you can't force people to accept something that they're not willing to accept, and it was stupid to begin with. I think I always think that I think what happened, which is rather unfortunate, is the Afrikaners embraced the framework that was handed to them by the British, and they loved it more than the British did. Because, I mean, look, that Shepstone system that became apartheid, and the philosophy of trusteeship, the white man's burden and everything, a lot of that is just, post hoc justifications for socioeconomic control in some distant bit of the world that you need minerals from. But the Afrikaners look at it and say, well, yes, this is why we have the right and so on. And, 100 years ago, you could understand why people would fall for that. But when you look at how it shook out, it's sort of, you look at these people, you're nuts. You're nuts. You should have, But, that's water under the bridge. It's too late to talk about that stuff. I think back to reality. Let's talk about the next item on our list, which is, well, evil people, NEHAWU and their hospital strike.
Yes.
So the very, very short crop of it is that they wanted a 10% raise, and the government was offering 3%. Oh, hello, love you. I'm sure it'll be fine. Thank you so much. I have been brought supper. I am going to be eating on camera. I know it's very rude. I don't care. So, would you please talk for a bit so I can get a few mouthfuls in? I haven't eaten.
Oh, well, look, I mean, you know more about this topic than I do. I mean, this is I was focusing more on the first two stories of today rather than this one. But maybe we can get back to that story because maybe we can just maybe do a recap of our story from last week, which is what's been taking place in China and the mayor over there. So I think he was reinstated on the Wednesday or the Thursday as mayor. Yes, he was able to provide his certificate proving that he had been rehabilitated after his prior bankruptcy, I think it was. And then within a day, the multi-party coalition took a look at this. It was pretty obvious that it was fake when he spelled his name incorrectly repeatedly on the document, and it mentioned a court that didn't exist. The North Court, which no one, I mean, people are still trying to find out where that court was. They haven't found it. And I think as soon as it came out that it was fake, he immediately resigned because he was about to be kicked out as a councillor anyway. So it's just been, the most utterly bizarre story. I mean, it's typically, South African
where do
politics.
they find people like this? Where do you find people this dumb? I mean, it's like, look, the thing is, as retarded as most people in the Charterist parties are, they have some people who have a few functioning brain cells. Why couldn't they pick one of those guys?
Well, look, perhaps he got someone else because I mean, I think he was the candidate of the multi-party coalition, kept in the speaker position for a year. But look, I think maybe he brought someone else, one of these friends who forged documents before, possibly from who knows, to make him this document, and it was clearly caught out. But yeah, I think today they're having a vote. I don't know if the results are in yet, but they've got a vote. They've kicked out some of the rebel councillors from last time, and they've got a vote to elect a new speaker to the council. I think the candidates from Action SA. Hopefully within the next few days we'll also get a vote on a new mayor. Although I think there are some concerns now because they had to pass an adjustment budget, which I think is still being delayed. The Gauteng government has got their eyes on that city. I think they have been trying to put it under administration for a while, especially when they had that bad audit report that came out regarding the city's finances. So we'll have to see. I think after the multi-party coalition is able to reinstate their control over that city, I think the ANC is still going to work really hard to get it put under administration again. And then who knows how much they're going to loot from that.
I mean, what strikes me when I hear about all of these problems with balancing the accounts and everything is that, our demands for passing a clean audit are really, really not that strict. You can do enormous amounts of corruption. You can steal tons of stuff and still get a clean audit. And the ANC can't even manage just matching incoming and outgoing. I mean,
well, did you see that tweet where it was one municipality was celebrate getting a qualified audit result, which, one of the worst audit results you can get, and they put out a statement saying we have received a qualified audit result.
But it's like you could employ a first-year accounting student and he would get a balanced audit for you. Like, where are these people coming from? Like, I don't get it.
No, I mean, in some of these municipalities, I mean, certainly in some of these really rural backwater municipalities, I mean, I'm not even sure if they've got any accountants present there. I mean, if you're an accountant with any skill, you probably move to a place where you can have better prospects. But yeah, it's a total disaster, these municipalities. I mean, there's really not much effort really spent focusing on, that can be spent focusing on them. I mean, they're really, they're bound. Well, look, they've already collapsed. There's not much really to steal from there anymore.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. My wife really did a good number. It tastes exactly like my mother's as well. It's spooky. Anyway.
But yeah, I mean, Yeah, I mean that's the stories from Shwane. Maybe we can have Mark again next week after this has mostly concluded to discuss the new arrangement that will exist in that city. I think certainly the Freedom Front have proven themselves to be the most trustworthy coalition partner in that city. I don't think any of their councillors were found to have voted against the coalition. Yeah, look, it just goes to show that if you want Cape independence, vote for the Freedom Front. If you want a stable coalition in the rest of South Africa, the Freedom Front is also your party to choose as well.
Yeah, no. The whole thing is when I look up into the interior, I sort of stop. My eyes glaze over because I sort of think, well, this is all interesting, but at this point, it's rearranging deck chairs in the Titanic. Whatever you're doing up there, if you're not building for like community autonomy, what are you? It's like, look, I understand what they're doing up there. There is a point, and that's that from a certain position, if you manage to get a friendly coalition in, you can arrange concessions that facilitate building community autonomy, protecting these communities from what's to come. But they're on a sort of recovery. There's no recovery position. There's no recovery position here, and it's trying to manage decline. And for my money, the only real sort of articles of hope that emerge in this whole sort of scenario are, well, it's what communities have managed to achieve independence, to what degree, how have they managed to build resilience against state authority, and for that you really have to turn to the AfriForums of this world, the Iranians of this world, and occasionally some traditional communities in KZN and Eastern Cape, although there are not many of those either. This is why, for me, I mean, the reason I tend to focus so much on issues that are here in the Cape is the whole, this is where the last sort of grains of hope are. And
I think what you see in the rest of the country, especially in the interior, is that as a community becomes more independent and self-sufficient and takes more control over its own local affairs, I think you also see a tendency for that community to become far more strong for the Freedom Front. So, I mean, if you look at, there's this one municipality in the northwest where I think they were able to take control over certain, the one town was able to take control over certain functions from the municipality, and the community ran these functions instead. And then in local government election results from 2021, this was the only municipality where the Freedom Front actually was the second largest party. They were able to become the official opposition in the municipality to the ANC. And we also see in places like Limpopo and places like Nabu and Spray, where the Freedom Front there, I mean, actually controls the ward. So that's quite important as well, because with ward councillors, they've got a budget for their ward that they can allocate for projects in the community. So there are benefits for the party taking control of these wards, because it's sort of a mini municipality in many ways. And we'll see that continue as well. I think that's why Shwane, I keep a close eye on Shwane, is because obviously Pretoria is there, and that's the largest concentration of Afrikaners in the country. I think there's about 500,000 Afrikaners in Pretoria. So if you want to see what's going to happen with Afrikaner self-determination, obviously Solidarity and AfriForum have a lot of their own headquarters in that city. So the future of Afrikaner self-determination is going to be defined by what happens in Pretoria as well.
No, that's true. I think it's also sort of like there are these quasi-sacred sites to Afrikaner identity that are up there, and the Voortrekker Monument in particular. And it's sort of like I think everyone understands that. Okay, the Cape's there if we really want to, but your blood, when your blood is in the soil and the soil's in your blood, you can't really leave. You have to sort of resist and hang on. And I think,
I was with Peter Groenewald. Well, I was listening to Peter Groenewald at a conference once in Orania, where it was the youth conference for the year, and they were speaking about Cape independence briefly. And he was explaining, obviously, because 90% of the people at that conference aren't from the Cape; they're from the north. And he was explaining why the party supports that position. And he compared it in many ways to Israel, especially for Afrikaans speakers. So you can live in the northwest, he said, but for example, if you want to send your kids to a school or a university where Afrikaans is the medium of instruction, then the Cape is an option there. And he said it's a very similar situation to what Jews have with Israel. He said that's why the Freedom Front supports it, is because it's an Afrikaans majority region that can provide a lot of Afrikaans language services for people in the rest of the country. So that's why there's a lot of reasons for people in the north to support it, and obviously it is, as you said, a place of refuge as well,
and a safe haven for capital. I mean, an independent Cape. I mean, can you think about it? We already have our own stock exchange. We have a lot, like most of our economy now is like financial services and things like that. So we have a lot going for us in that regard, as a haven from whatever might happen in future Azania. I mean, the Cape's really it. I mean, the only other option really is Orania Savings and Loan, which is it's performing such a stellar job. I mean, the growth in that bank, extraordinary. And it just started out with a guy sort of just doing payday deposits of people's wages, just looking after the money while they transfer it. It's remarkable. And they're now in the position that they can talk about sort of targeted investment strategies and massive expansion. I mean, one of the things that they did, they're now doing this thing where you can get up to, I think, a 700,000 Rand interest-free loan to set up your house in Orania from that bank. I mean, just like the kind of stuff that you can do once you've got an organized capital base. And so I think wherever you are in the country, you really do want Cape independence to go through, because it's the only way that industry will be able to ring fence itself against the depredations of the South African state. So anyway.
Yeah, and I mean, look, I mean, Orania is great, and I obviously support everything they're doing. But the one major advantage the Cape has over them is that we've got sea access as well. So if the national government wants to try and cut you off, we're in a far better position down here with our own port and our own sea access than the middle of the country.
Speaking of which, I had a tremendous idea that occurred to me. Like if I was like in charge of the United States, like I was, I don't know, head of the CIA or something like that, I would think, or let's say the Council on Foreign Relations or something, I would say, I don't know, I really think that these fellas in Pretoria might go and take away all of these vital minerals that are necessary to industrial processes and increase their price quite a lot. And so I think we should take control of the situation. How can you gain control? Very easy. You make friends with Mozambique, which they're already doing through trying to control the rebellion in Cabo Delgado. You make friends with the IFP and you push off Zulu independence. You make friends with the Cape, you push off Cape independence. Then you've got the entire country ring-fenced, no access to any nearby port. They have to go through one of three allies, because there's no way they're going to build new infrastructure and get a high-class railway and several million TEUs to pump through Port Elizabeth. It's not going to happen. They're going to have to rely on Cape Town, Durban, and Maputo, like they always have. And that way, you can encircle the interior and demand concessions from them, and return them to
going back to Rhodesia again. I mean, that's how they cut off Rhodesia in the end. I mean, it was because they cut off them first in Mozambique, the energy supplies there, and then it was South Africa next that started to cut them off, which eventually suffocated the country. The same thing for the interior of South Africa.
But it's a remarkable. I mean, there's like a neglected little pocket of history from between 1900 and 1910, where we were a customs union, not a unified dominion. And in that period, there was actually a customs and rail tariff dispute between Transvaal and Natal and Cape Town. So Natal and Cape Town were competing on customs tariffs, on port tariffs. and Transvaal was hiking up the rail tariffs. And at a certain point, the Transvaal said, we don't want anything to do with this. We're going to send our goods out through Maputo. And at that point, everyone got together and said, oh, no, we can't do this. It would be going back to war because we have to control those minerals, you see. So we would have to wage war against you again. And at this point, everyone decided, okay, let's consolidate this into one country so that the Portuguese don't get the royalties for our minerals. And it's like that sort of geostrategic tension is the entire reason this country exists. And I think if you can't appreciate that, it's you're missing the point of why this country
it can be the
exists.
cause of our union and the defeat of our union.
Exactly. And it's just it doesn't make sense for people to look at this as I mean, what culture does everyone have in common except the common experience of British imperialism? That's all we have in common, is that some foreigners whose country is currently on terminal decline used to once determine our political structures.
And we also see that, I mean, the last time we saw major political instability back in, during the July riots in 2021, I mean, remember that plays into this again, because you had those main transport routes from the port in Durban to Gauteng that were targeted by a lot of the instigators, trying to cut off connection to the interior. So, I mean, this is already playing itself out as we speak, I think.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is that the old heads in the ANC understand this stuff at a very deep level. I mean, they went to good schools in Moscow. They went to good schools in Moscow. They got good military training. They understand this stuff. People look at Jacob Zuma like he's a dunce. He understands these things. But not that he went to good schools, but he swam in those waters and he learned from the best. I think one of the things you watch these kind of protests going on, what I think they forget sometimes is that they don't have this big cushion of wealth that they used to have when everything was functioning. And there's only so many sort of knocks the machine can get before it just stops running. And I think at the same time, we're not facing an enemy. So they're not facing an enemy, shall I say, that is as implacable as, I don't know, like apartheid. It's not as popular to oppose state policy as it used to be. And so what's been happening now what's been happening now with the NEHAWU strike? So NEHAWU is one of our big unions, and the National Education, Health and Allied Workers Union. And they've been striking for 2 weeks now. They've been demanding 10% pay increases because they don't just want the government's trying to tighten the screws to keep the budget under control, and so they only offered this year a 3% pay rise, which is 2% below No, it's not. It's 4% below inflation rate this year because we're up to 7.8. Usually we hover around 5 or 6%, but recently things have been getting a bit steeper. NEHAWU now, the tactics they've been using have been, well, I mean, usually there's the whole barricading the street, burning tires, blocking roads, that kind of stuff. But now they've gotten to the point where they're busting into live surgery. They're trying to bust into live surgeries to stop doctors from operating on live patients on the table. They've stopped ambulances to try and pull injured kids out of the back. I don't think they have.
They said they don't care if people die as a result of this as well.
Correct. This was on the front page. Yeah, but this opens them up to dolus eventualis, the knowing cause of death in others. It's if you know that your actions will lead to the death of others and you undertake them anyway, which is what they've openly admitted now. They're opening themselves up to criminal prosecution. Now, it depends.
Let's compare it to what happened in the UK. I mean, they had a nurses' strike a while ago.
They're having one right now. It's a doctor's strike.
Is it still ongoing? But what I heard was there was a story where someone, I think, collapsed pretty much outside of the picket line. And unlike here, where they probably wouldn't have done anything and they probably would have kicked the person set them on fire. Here in the UK, what they did was they actually broke the picket, actually started helping the person, took them through to the hospital, and did their job. Completely different to what happened here.
No. I mean, what these people have been doing is absolutely inhuman, and I will have no sympathy for any violence that is met upon them by the security forces, none whatsoever. The kind of person who's capable of doing this, you're arguing for a few points on your paycheck. Okay, you're already earning I mean, like the salaries are. I mean, I don't earn an enormous amount of money. I live between freelance research projects, right? And so I don't earn a hell of a lot. And I look at these people who are willing to let people die for a 10% increase.
Not just let people die, kill them. I mean, what they're basically doing is killing them.
Yeah, I honestly think that if my family, if a family member of mine, like my kid or my wife, was killed by these people, you'd be beside yourself. The ability, and you can be as God-fearing as the next fella, but it's one thing to say you'll turn the other cheek. To actually do it is mighty hard, and I would not be surprised if there are some vengeful attacks on these these staff for what they have done.
Well, I saw one story where they said they wanted an increase so that they could afford to go on to private healthcare. So, I mean, they don't even trust their own colleagues when it comes to providing healthcare services. They don't even trust themselves.
Right.
They want to, use the private system.
The worst part is if you go and look at the private system, those guys actually earn less than at the public hospitals. They earn less. And when you go into a private hospital, okay, some of them don't have a lot of, they have to run a very lean system. But they are polite. They give a damn. They treat you like a human being, And
that's why people use them when they can.
Exactly. I mean, the experiences some people are. But I remember my mother was a nurse, so she worked in the 1980s, and back then it was illegal for medical staff to protest. Yet they did so anyway. At this point, the government is under such pressure to not do anything to get on the international front pages. They didn't even want to enforce the law. They were scared. And my mother describing this at the time, she was saying how shocked she was because she couldn't imagine abandoning her patients for a minute. It was inconceivable to her that anyone would strike, even if they were earning a pittance, because of how essential the duty that you're providing is. And I think about, my mother's attitude towards this. And my mother, she's a very meek woman if you meet her. She's not, she doesn't have bold opinions. She doesn't, but I've seen her in circumstances which demanded courage, where she will display, absolute fearlessness. I mean, there was a time when our house got broken into in Johannesburg, and there's two youngsters from Alexandria, because they lived a couple of blocks, because Alexandria was only a few blocks away from where we lived, so it was walking distance. And they came into the house when my mother was there and, held her at knife point. And one of them decided he was going to get some extra intimidation out of her. My mother would be very cooperative anyway, but he decides to wave the knife in her face. And she loses her temper, grabs the knife by the blade, and tells him, "You don't do that, it's rude." And it's just like, I can't imagine that kind of spirit animating any of the bastards who are on the picket line. Where your moral values are so important that your bodily integrity doesn't come near it. I mean, even I don't have, such. I don't even have a spirit like that. But you see the degenerates that occupy the unions in this country. I have very strong.
And now we see with the EFF, look, they're shut down on the 20th. It could be a lot of hot air. It could be.
Remember, they've done this 3 times. I went and looked this up. They promised they'd do it in July last year, in June last year, and in August last year.
The only
And
thing
we've
that
seen nothing.
the only thing I'm questioning though is they announced this in January, and they said they're going to do this in March. So it wasn't like a sudden thing, like, oh, we're going to do this next week. I mean,
Yeah.
they've been doing this 2 months in advance, and that makes me wonder whether there's actually been some planning or at least a little bit of coordination involved.
I think if you want to see motion, you want to look if they have union allies. Because I know there were comments last year when they were talking about this. There were comments that they had a couple of unions on their side. They weren't enormously big. One of them was a big name. I can't remember which one, but the others were small unions. I would pay attention to that, because if the unions are getting involved, then you're going to be seeing something. But I think the other thing is that they're calling for looting and so on, right?
And
What they're
threats
gonna
on
be
children. Let's remember that.
and threats on children. But remember, this time they're targeting the same areas that were targeted in June 2021. And everybody's seen those videos of those guys standing and picking off members of zombie mobs with long-range shotguns and rifles and things. The thing is that all of those people, the security personnel that are involved in these things, I was speaking to one of them. So there's a sort of rather colorful gent on Twitter called K9 Reaper. I don't know how much I trust his sort of large scale political analysis, but what he has been saying about the people that he works with is that they have been stockpiling because they remember what it was like last time when they were running low on ammo and running low on hardware. And I think that if the EFF is successful, they will be unsuccessful, if that makes sense to you. So if their protests are too disruptive, they will die in large numbers. And whatever that does for national morale remains to be seen. But I don't think that people are going to tolerate them, because the people in those areas have experience in facing this before, and they will not be fooled twice. And I think that members in the EFF who they had better want to be martyrs really bad if they want to do this.
Well, I was just checking now. Maybe I can get the tweet up. Nazir Paulson, he was the former. I mean, he's a clown, really, but he's a member of Parliament for the EFF, and he's put out a tweet just a few minutes ago about the shutdown. Let me just get it up here. If you can see it here, he says, those little mediocre white men down here in the soon-to-be decolonized Cape are having such a meltdown because of the 20 March 2023 national shutdown. Wait till they hear what we have planned for the 6th of April 2023 when we start taking back the land. So, I mean, it's... Look, I don't know if they're planning to, engage.
No,
I know that's in Stellenbosch.
They're playing silly buggers. They're playing silly buggers because I tell you what, any action that the EFF could organize is something that I promise you the guys in Solidariteit and AfriForum are prepared for. They don't make noise about it. Look
at Brackenfell. They didn't even have any structure there. And yet they still were able to...
bugger the Cape. I mean, the thing is that they're not going to organize enough stuff for the Cape. But here's the thing. If they do something in the Cape, independence is on the cards immediately. But for the rest of the country, they can't do anything.
He talks about the land thing. I do know that in Stellenbosch, I think they were involved there in land seizures and the land invasions. I think they were bragging that they've started a township next to Kaimundi that the EFF is basically running. And if you look at the voting data there, it is quite strong for the EFF. I think the EFF got more than a third of the vote. This is true,
but he's right. He's right in so much in that the Cape is a soft target because the Cape does not have experience with the kind of violence and disorder that happens in the rest of the country. And so the challenges that people in the Cape face are apathy. What it will do, though, is it will galvanize people very rapidly. And the second that they pull something like this, where they actually take land where people are living, as opposed to open spaces, if they try that, it will take not very long for people to get their shit in order. And I think that the difference over here, is a matter of numbers. So there, in the rest of the country, we are represented as, I don't know, like not even 10%, about 7% now. Most of the rest.
I think in the rest of the country we're probably more like 5% nowadays,
Yeah.
5-6%.
Here in the Cape, it's somewhere between 15 and 20%. And we're getting an increasing influx of people from the rest of the country. We have a large number of armed security that outnumbers the police. And I think that, look, if they do manage to pull off what happens in March, if they do manage to pull off a shutdown and it has an effect in the Cape, that will be the downfall of their plan in April. But if nothing much happens in the Cape, then on the 20th, they have more of a chance of taking some victories in April, because people will still sort of roll their eyes at the idea. But I think generally speaking, if they pull this off, in the rest of the country, they'll be hurt really badly. And in the Cape, people will immediately say, well, can the DA prevent this from happening? Oh, no, you can't. Oh, right. Well, then we're going to vote for whoever wants to pull Cape independence. And that's going to be Cape Coloured Congress. It's going to be the Freedom Front Plus. And to a small extent, for your English liberal types, it will also be for the Cape Independence Party. And I think that the DA's already declining position is going to
even my town, I always like to say that this is a town where I think when shit hits the fan, it's going to be the last place to feel it, because, we don't really have a squatting issue. It's a town where you get a lot of the, especially the older folk moving, buying, their homes here, their retirement homes here. And even here, they're starting to prep. There's probably in the main part of town 1,500 people, I'd say. And on our prepper group, we've now got 60 people. So, you've got 4% of the town on a group that was created a week ago in a place that's not feeling the problems of the rest of the country. And there's already a community, a neighbourhood watch being set up in the town. And people are looking what's happening in the rest of the country, and they want to protect what they've got here. So if you get like a catalyst like what the EFF might do next week, we never know, then that would really galvanise people in this community.
Yeah, no, I just sort of I kind of actually hope that they don't manage much. I know it's not the ideal thing for Cape Independence to sort of see people complacent about threats, but I think that we can ill afford a lot of damage right now. And I don't know. I think the other thing is that if there's a lot of action, they'll also attract a lot more support. But I think, in times to come, there's going to have to be something done about the threat they pose.
Yeah, look, I think at the moment, I think from the EFF side, I think the ANC is slightly different, although I think they're less capable nowadays of, as an organisation at least, organising these ungovernable campaigns. They've still got their affiliates like the gangs, which they can work with, but I think as an organisation, they can't even organise their provincial conference. They don't have the money for that. But I think when you look at the EFF, I think what we saw in Brackenfell, I think that was a real, in the Western Cape, a real show of what their force is capable of. And actually, if you look at the response to it, it's very, very little compared to the opposition force that it will face.
Well, no, it's very true. I think we're sitting in a very sort of how should I put it, fluctuating position at the moment. It's we don't really know where things are going, and 2024 is a major pivot point, and so we're going to have to look. We've got to hope the stars align for us. So for Cape Independence to work, there's a lot of things that have to line up. Most things look like they are. We look like we'd be getting very, very lucky. So the DA is declining in the province. Good. DA support is sort of being scared away by stupid choices being made by the party. Good. Cape Independence already has majority support. Good. I know the last polls, like more than a year ago, sort of put them at slightly below 50% outright want Cape independence.
46% support, 50% oppose.
But I mean, that was, and now it's going to be higher than that for sure. And at this point, when I talk to people about Cape independence, the number of people who push back on the idea are so few. There are people who sort of they would rather go over the waterfall than rock the boat, but they're getting fewer and fewer in number. And I think that it heading to a great likelihood. International arena as well. The tensions between East and West mean, we're facing the likelihood that we become politically important in the region. The likelihood that they're going to want someone other than a Russo-Chinese ally in charge of mineral flows in the southern tip of Africa will increase. And look, while the Democrats would never back something like Cape independence because of the power of the symbolism it would represent to break South Africa up, we're likely going to get a Republican president next term. I think the thing is that, the economic downturn that we're going to face is also going to accelerate matters for us, because it seems like there might be some contagion from the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank. And I think, look, I don't know enough about them and I'm going to be reading up a little bit before next week, because I think we can add in a nice little a drop of global angle to this kind of stuff. But I think we're going to see an economic downturn before the end of the year, and that it'll be quite severe. And I think that at the moment, because the Democrats have realized that it's the economy that's now your big motivator, and they've started doing some nice pork barreling. But it's not going to help if the economy is taking a downturn, and people really don't like Joe Biden. They really don't. And so even as chaotic as the Republican leadership competition is going to be, whoever turns out, whether it's Ron DeSantis, whether it's Donald Trump, they're going to, I think we're going to see a Republican-led government. Even if they jiggle the outcome somewhat in swing states with, dodgy electronic voting deals. And it's, there's only so much you can really tweak.
Someone said, I think it was Cervanich or someone like that, he said, vote beyond the margin of cheating.
Right, because the margin of cheating in countries like the United States is actually quite narrow. It's quite narrow, It's not like there's Zimbabwe or whatever where you can just steal 10% and say. You have to do, like, you can only take a wafer thin margin.
Literally less than 1%, I think. If you look at some of the margins in these states, and obviously there's still a lot of contention about what was taken away and what wasn't taken away. I don't think we should really go too much into that.
No. I don't mean to.
His margin went from 1 or 2%. It was less than 1% in 2018 in his first governor run, and it went into 20%. After his next one, so I don't think there was any attempts there to try and.
Why? Exactly. The areas that are accused of jiggling the vote are these like really razor thin swing state areas. And so if I was going to do it, that's the way I'd do it too. You can't. You can't. You know what I mean? Like, eat where the porridge is cool, shall I say? You won't burn your tongue. And
also, it does make sense that the more moderate candidates the Republican put forward, even though they're slightly more moderate. If you look at, compared to the UK, the moderate Republicans are quite conservative. But if you look, for example, in Georgia, the governor candidate there in 2022, won by a significant margin. I think the same was in Ohio. They had a more moderate Republican standing, won by a significant margin. And then obviously you had Kerry Lake in Arizona, who was quite on the right, and she narrowly lost there. So it definitely depends on the candidate quality.
Yeah, look, if our friends in the international world manage to catch the ear of the big shots in America in the next year or so, the likelihood is that it'll be on some people's minds when South Africa goes down the toilet. And as I did the previous video I did, which I really need to redo because some kind soul brought it to my attention that I didn't present it accurately enough. So I'm going to redo, probably tomorrow, I'm going to redo that little video on South Africa's fiscal projections, right? I'll have some tidier graphs that are a little bit more legible. But I think the thing is that we are heading towards a major crisis moment where South Africa will likely have to be bailed out. And the costs of regenerating our infrastructure to the point at which we can have comfortable growth that will outpace our dependence on debt. It's not, this is not a target that we can hit. I remember the independence efforts, the autonomy efforts that are being pushed by Alan Winde. They're a little bit too little, too late. I mean, you looked at them and look, the DA are like, they are the competent party. They have the best civil servants. They have the best administrators. Let's not kid ourselves. As much as we don't like their political positions, they do have the best of the best in that regard. And the problem with that is that it gives you a benchmark for what's possible, and it's scary how little can be achieved. Because you look at what they said, in the next 2 years, they're going to give us 750 megawatts of capacity in solar. So, okay, good. We're a very sunny country. That's great. So it'll be fine for most of the time. Okay. In winter, it's going to be irritatingly, at the highest demand period of the year, you're now going to get intermittent service. But it's 750 megawatts. The thing is, in order to make us energy independent, their goal is that by 2030, they're going to have 6 gigawatts in place. But 750 in 2 years is what they have demonstrated themselves capable of delivering in terms of acquiring contracts. And if you take that to be indicative of what they can afford and what they can implement, then that 6 gigawatt target is a castle in the sky. And what we're going to have to do is take cable theft much more seriously, take illegal connections much more seriously, and just make it very, very difficult for people to steal electricity, because that's one of the bigger burdens. And
well, I think we need to maybe, after Cape Independence, charge a lot more people under the terrorism laws for many of the activities that currently don't even really get prosecuted. I think you need to really take like a Bukele, I think his name, the El Salvadorian guy.
I very much
really
like that
approach on that.
Absolutely. I mean, I would take out the I think any sort of serious governor of this part of the world would take the entire taxi cartel industry and treat them as an organized crime syndicate and lock them all away immediately. You'd do the same for anyone who's got numbers tattoos, or any of the major gangs, like mongrels, sexy boys, Americans, whoever. You chuck them in prison. And I think, you would see a massive decline. I mean, I've seen estimates for the homicide rate, how much of the gangs participate. It's between like 20 and 50%. And like, that's the stuff that we know about. So I think...
in El Salvador, I mean, they say that the numbers, although there is some contention regarding how accurate they are, because I heard there's a weird way, they don't count a murder if they haven't got the body or something, and a lot of these bodies are hidden. So the murder...
No, I remember this criticism, but I'll say this much. So there were 2 phases to the crackdown in El Salvador. In the first phase, Bukele brokered a deal with the gangs that they would stop murdering or cut down on the murdering in exchange for a little bit of lenience, while he ramped up the political and security machinery to take them down. And he got a lot of criticism at the time because, okay, murder rate dropped by 20 points per 100,000, okay, but people were like, no, but this is Hong Kong. They're disappearing the bodies instead of leaving them in the street and so on. But now it's incontrovertible that what he's done has had a massive impact, because they have gone from 100 people per 100,000 murdered every year down to
less than 10. I think it's
less
5
than
or
10.
something.
Yeah, it's single digits.
No, I'm not denying that there's been a significant drop. I mean, I'm just saying I mean, it might not be 10, it might be maybe slightly higher than 10, but it's
Yeah.
still a significant drop in a very short period of time.
Yeah, it's unprecedented. It's
Yeah.
it's unprecedented, and I think
And also, you just need to look at the approval ratings, because if there's all these murders taking place, but the government's coming out with those figures, well, you can look at the approval ratings, and people will know if the murder rate is high. You don't actually need the government to tell you. If you don't feel safe, you don't feel safe. The government can give you whatever statistics they want, but you know what your lived experience is. And look, even the critics of him say his approval rating is 70%. So clearly people feel a lot safer under his leadership than under previous governments. So look, there's no doubt that there's been a significant improvement in the situation there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that look, it's the number one priority for any state, and if you cannot handle security, then you're not good for anything. So on that very sort of firm and confirmatory note, one thing I would like to do before we go, because we have 20 minutes before the power shuts off, is to read through our kind audience's responses and hunt for little questions so that we can respond to people. Now, I have something from Umbro van Wyk, who said, "Who was the black captain in the diary?" I'm afraid I don't know what you mean by that. I'll get you to the end if you can clarify. Oh, right, yes. I think he means the Carbona, the whole sort of story about the Xhosa we were talking about at the beginning. Now that unless he's talking about something else, because I haven't read his diaries myself. I've got a copy on my shelf, but I haven't read it yet. But what Eva Kratoa did is that she blended together a whole bunch of stories about the Black Kingdoms of the interior, and sort of claimed that they were just beyond her tribe's territories, which were at the time defined by, False Bay. And so there was the idea that just beyond a day or two's ride, there was Monomatopa. So Monomatopa was at the time a sort of very powerful. I think he might have just died at the time, but he was a major king in what's now Zimbabwe. Profited a lot of the secondary effects of the Arab and Portuguese slave trade on the East Coast. All right. Worldview. Donald has been chirping us all evening, hey? He really has. What is a thingamajig? Is that a technical term? Yeah, ask your mother. More jibes from Donald. More jabber. Let's look for question marks. Comments on Hermanus, which is depressing. My cousin.
We got some good news from Vian, who said that there's apparently no more space left for people to put their shouts.
I mean, they say, I mean, you can say that's good news, but I mean, my sweet baby, I did. It's like, well, you can't fall further than the floor, can you? My goodness. So lots of people are having their own little debate. Does the bill actually begin with an Almighty God clause? Now, that refers to the People's Bill. Now, the answer to that is no.
I don't think we can really go into the details of what's in the bill.
No,
I think it's in the Constitution.
That's what I'm saying. It's in the Western Cape Constitution. So for those who don't know, the Western Cape wrote its own constitution. So you're allowed to do this under the South African laws. The provinces are allowed to write their own constitutions. They can't take too much power away from the national government, but it does allow some sort of creativity. And the difference is the national constitution founds its morality in social justice, whereas the Western Cape founds its morality in the transcendent power of God. And I think that sort of tells you all that you need to know about where the two of us are headed. Where are we? Okay, Donald's another one of his joke questions. if we can destroy the Suez Canal, why don't we just bomb the Union bullies? For obvious reasons, Donald, that's why. Okay, people are not very inquisitive today, mostly just conversation and commentary. So let's see. Okay, I think we're done. Which Republicans are you having in mind? Actually, that's a good question.
Well, I think the ones I'm most interested in, because I've been speaking to certain people on that side of the pond, is the Republicans who were behind the resolution criticising South Africa for their involvement in military activities with the Chinese. So there was a resolution proposed. I think it was our first show we spoke about it.
Yes.
It was all Republicans who supported that resolution on the Foreign Affairs Committee and the Committee for Africa. So I think those are a good group of people to start off with.
That's true. I mean, look, there are other back channels that are through various sort of societies and groups that I have. I'm people have in the movement have friends in. So we're trying to pull a few strings, but it's like five or so degrees of separation. Actually, technically about 4, but so there's people can pull some strings and get word to some of the members of the Republican leadership. But in terms of direct lobbying, at the moment, I think the sponsors that bill, I think it's House Resolution 145, if you want to go look it up. Chances of it passing are minimal. However, it does show that there is at least some chunk of the Republicans who are sort of NATO hawks who actually would entertain the idea of getting involved in South Africa one way or another. It's completely, there's no chance of it succeeding at the moment with Democrats where they are, and Republicans being as tepid as they usually are.
Well, it's not an issue that's really discussed too much in America at the moment, South Africa.
No.
So, I mean, look,
I think it'll change if EWC comes down the pipeline, because, I mean, there's some mining concerns in South Africa that are of extraordinary importance. I mean, the helium mine that was recently opened, that is extremely vital. That's now going to provide a huge chunk of global helium supply, and helium is necessary for all kinds of high-tech manufacturing. We're a big source of palladium internationally, as well as platinum and iridium and osmium and a whole bunch of weird platinum group metals. And we're also we're also a big source of coal supply for Germany, and there's weird things that we get involved into. The other thing is that, with the explosion of the renewable energies industry, we have an as yet untapped mine that prospecting has showed is the largest and purest deposit of rare earth minerals on the planet. And it's also rock deposits, not shale deposits, which means that it is going to be very, very easy and cheap to mine, relatively speaking. I mean, concentrations normally for rare earth minerals are something like 1 in 100. But over here, it's like it's 1 in 10 or below. It's really nice high concentration. That's a Steenkamp. The reason it took them 4 years just to get the prospecting license. And there was a report in Engineering News, and for anyone who wants to see what's really going on in South Africa, I think one of the best places to look is Creamer Media's stuff like Engineering News, Mining News, and so on. Very, very dry, apolitical stuff, but you get a lot of meat and potatoes there. They pointed out that mining licenses in South Africa can often take around 10 years to turn around. And so it's very, very difficult to get things moving. So that's one thing that certainly a Western-friendly sort of Western Cape government can really provide is much more efficient delivery of licensing and access to it. We've got offshore gas and liquid natural gas is going up through the roof right now. It's so I think I think all things considered, if you're interested in realpolitik, Western Cape is your place to go. Peel us off, make us your friends. Me, I'm sort of I'm like emotionally relatively indifferent to what's going on in the Ukraine. Not because I'm pitiless, but because I don't see either side as particularly nice people. Each have good reasons for defending what's theirs, and and this is not me taking a coward's way out, because my position is that the more the Russia wins, the more it puts pressure on the United States to seek allies where they can in the shifting global battlefield. And that's really what I want to see. I want to see the United States, this is purely self-interested, I want to see the United States getting serious enough about where their allies are in the international world that they do get involved in South Africa, whatever their bandwidth is. For the simple reason that they would have to pick a solution where we come out on top, because we're an easy cherry to pick. As I said, the 3-port strategy, it's easy peasy. Well, not easy peasy, but certainly a low-hanging fruit anyway.
Yeah, nothing too difficult for the CIA.
Yes, no. Well, this is or the Atlantic Council for that matter. So Timo Bohr is a guy I know from Twitter, actually, a really nice fella. He says, if Cape Independence does become a theatre for the geopolitics, then what's stopping a Korea situation? Well, I will tell you that nothing is stopping a Korea situation. I think that the likelihood that the country splits into 2 or more entities, where you have an interior that's governed by an inept and sort of communistic government, is very, very likely. And the West being more sort of free market capitalist. I'll be 5 minutes. Yeah. Anyway, the difference between the Western Cape and the rest of the country will only become more pronounced. So the only thing that would stop that being a long-term sort of deadlock would be, as I say, America, the West, adopting the 3-port strategy, encircling the Transvaal, and then putting pressure on them to reform. That would be the only real way out. But that remains to be seen. And then comparing us to Czechoslovakia and South Sudan. And True Capitalist Investor asks, what things would you do first if you became dictator of an independent Cape? Me? Tackle the gangs. It's very, very simple. Gangs, illegal land invaders. It's very simple. You got to get law and order is your number 1 priority in any state. You get that under control, you can make hay with.
What is a state?
Make hay in.
Monopoly of violence.
Correct.
So once you've got that, you're a state.
Yeah. Easy peasy. That was an easy question to answer. Do you honestly want NATO in your backyards? Is one of 44. Nice little name there. I see what you see the reference. I don't know. My thing is, look, you need international recognition. If you're going to get independence, you need international recognition. And I think saying I want them in my backyard for all that they are, yeah. But I mean, we're a tiny nation. We can't go it alone. We may have access to the sea, but that's not going to change anything if we can't get access to capital markets, if we can't get access to preferential trade, if we can't, the repercussions for going it alone without any recognition are quite severe. And I think it's really easy to recognize. And my first thesis proposal before I did ended up doing a study of Japanese drug prohibition was on the survival rate of de facto states, and it is much lower than when they're recognized. Just the descriptive statistics on those, you can just see it immediately. If your country is recognized, it survives a lot longer before anything like a revolution, regime change, collapse, debt default, any of those kind of major crisis events. Yeah, you want to be recognized.
No country really has 100% control over their own sovereignty. I mean, they've always got to, deal with international organizations like the UN, like NATO, etc. I guess the question is, which option is going to give you more sovereignty? Remaining under the ANC as it is, or having to ally with NATO, which isn't the worst I mean, it's quite clear you can have a lot more sovereign control under NATO.
Look, you're going to have to swallow a lot of slime in order to get the ball rolling there. You're going to have to make concessions to certain international investors.
It's like what we see with Meloni in Italy. She's
Right. No, it's
surrendering a
true.
lot of her foreign policy control in order to have more control over domestic policy. And I think certainly for us,
It's a good trade.
in the first 10-year period at least, is to make sure that we have a complete change in direction when it comes to domestic policy, especially regarding, as we said, law and order. So, I mean,
Absolutely necessary.
we need to play with the cards that we're given.
I would agree. I think my sort of real concern here is, the same thing that every sort of NATO satrapy on the borders of the empire really has. The same thing that happened in Georgia, where they said, well, we want to get rid of the foreign influence NGOs, so the foreign agents just rioted in their capital. And I sort of thought, well, this is a challenge that you're going to have to face. And look, we've been a hotbed of sort of Western infiltration for 100 years, more than that. And we deal with it and we get on with our lives for the most part. But the thing is, if you're not independent, you can't make any of those challenges, and they can't rescind recognizing your national. They can't rescind national recognition immediately. And as long as you're not doing anything absolutely horrendous, they're not likely to embargo you. So I think the trick is to just know exactly what the balance of forces is and do what's in your interest within those balance of forces and not be stupid about it. And as long as you're pragmatic about these issues, I think things will work out as well as they can. So that's.
Well, look, I think we've got about 5 minutes now before we're going to be both hit with load shedding. So I think maybe now's the time to wrap things up.
Yes, absolutely. I think. Look, this has been a fun week. It's been an enraging week. I'm glad for Jacob Zuma's contribution to this week's comedy show. I look forward to seeing what the Teletubbies are up to in the future.
It's going to be every week comes with its new stories.
Yeah. All right. Well, good night and good luck, everybody. God bless. Remember
to like and share the video.
Remember to like and share the video. Oh yeah, and if you're still thinking about voting next year, please remember Vryheidsfront Plus, Cape Independence Party, or Cape Coloured Congress, whichever one tickles your fancy.
Or if you're Zulu, the IFP.
Oh yes, absolutely. Please vote. Please vote IFP. Give the king my greetings. All right. Good night, everybody.
Night, everyone.